Hiya. So I'm Sharon. I'm an artist based in Sheffield. And I'm going to talk about the exciting potential of cross-stitch, which usually kind of falls on blank faces, but I think I've got right audience today. I make artwork that's influenced by religion, and I'm particularly interested in medieval religious artwork and architecture. But I'm an atheist myself, and I'm really interested in it kind of from an outsider point of view. My work's all sort of based on death, so I'm quite interested in the sort of hope that people who've got faith get from the religion. And my work's very much sort of about questioning my own lack of beliefs and just kind of thinking out loud, really. And I tend to mix sort of medical and biological influences in with these kind of religious themes. I do work in a variety of media, but I would say that I'm mostly a painter. But I've been cross-stitching kind of as a hobby for over 20 years now. And strangely, I didn't kind of put the two things together until more recent years when I was sort of thinking, I got bored of cross-stitch patterns, basically. And you've kind of done one picture of a puppy, you've done them all. And I was kind of thinking, like, well, what can I do that's a bit more exciting? But the way I paint, like, I practice a lot first until I've got it right, and then I'll trace it out on a big piece of tracing paper. And so I've got all these bits of tracing paper hanging around with these pictures on. I kind of thought, well, if I put that onto graph paper, then it'd transpose straight into a cross-stitch pattern with a little bit of tweaking around edges. So this is the first one that I did as a cross-stitch pattern, as a piece of cross-stitch art, which is the painting before, same size, straight onto graph paper. And it went down surprisingly well, that one, but although I do like it, I do think that it doesn't really offer anything that the painting didn't give you before. It's the same picture. I don't think it particularly uses cross-stitch in an exciting way. And that's kind of more where my work with cross-stitch is going these days. It's looking at how to use cross-stitch in a way that's appropriate to the medium rather than it just being any old picture on a piece of canvas. So for last year, I've been working on this project called The Thread of Life, which is, it's a cross-stitch project kind of in two parts, and it's inspired by the three fates from Greek myth. And they spin, measure, and cut each person's thread of life, and so kind of decide how long each person's going to live and perhaps what's going to happen to him during the course of their life. And it was funded last October by a crowdfunding campaign online, and I've now got Art Council funding for it as well, which means that I've been giving sort of free workshops around the country all year, and all materials are provided. And this idea of the three fates and a thread of life kind of got me thinking about DNA and how it's quite sort of a literal thread of life, and it might define sort of how long you live and what happens to you in life. And this is like a really basic version of the DNA pattern, which you've kind of all got dotted around on your chairs as well. And this is kind of just a sample that I use, because what I'm really looking for is for people to make their own work and to choose their own colours or style or embellishments and really kind of make each piece as individual as each person is. But it's quite hard because as soon as you throw someone an example, they kind of think that that's what it is, and it's quite difficult to get past this sort of idea of what should we be doing. I particularly struggle with people who are sort of hardcore cross-stitchers, because they're so used to having a kit that tells them how to do it and what colours to use and, you know, where everything goes, that kind of by throwing doors open and saying do whatever you like, I think it throws them a bit. So what I'm really interested in doing is looking at cross-stitch in a new way and kind of looking at it more in a contemporary art context, which is not really somewhere that it seems to be. It's always kind of been thought of as being quite twee, and this is sort of a traditional cross-stitch sampler. and sort of historically they literally were just samples of the work you could do. And it's always been quite a sort of low class form of embroidery. It's not like something like tapestry where you see these near priceless embroideries and tapestries in old houses. Cross stitch has always been quite low class, and it was a way of lower class people to add decoration to maybe like clothing or furnishings. And it works on sort of linens, which are like a cheaper fabric, so that you can count a pattern out on the thick fibres of the linen. And it's been a bit of a struggle actually with this project to kind of get some recognition for cross stitch as art, because there's almost like a prejudice against it, like it's a bit crap and that's that, and nobody really wants to have much to do with it. And even just finding galleries will let me come and teach for free. It sits in a strange no man's land between craft and art. So the craftier people, it's too arty for them, and then the art establishments, it's too crafty for them. So I've slowly been chipping away at it, and I've found some decent venues now, but it is a strange one actually, and it's a bit like nobody really wants to touch it. And here's a lovely example of a cross-stitch kit that you could buy if you wanted to. And I think kind of it's part of the reason why it's not considered high art or contemporary art is because I would argue that it's not particularly creative. I mean, you could buy a picture at Mona Lisa and you could fill it in, and it's a bit like a paint by numbers. And I'm not sure myself where the creative process comes from in that way, because someone else has done it, you're just kind of filling it in. And I mean, as a hobby, it's quite nice. I mean, I quite like to sit in front of telly at night and just sew away, and you almost switch off. Which, again, it's something that I'm looking at in a different way now, looking at cross-stitch in a contemporary art way rather than this traditional, slightly twee, paint-by-numbers way. And I've joined quite a few sort of cross-stitch groups online and stuff to try and get in touch with people, get people to know about my project and stuff. And it gets a really weird reception from cross-stitchers because... partly because I think I'm slightly offensive for saying it's not very creative, but also it's a bit too art for them, and they're very sort of set in the ways about how they like cross-stitch to be. And I've been kicked out of a few groups, and I've had nasty messages sent saying it's not appropriate and all sorts of mad stuff happening online. But I did ask on some of the groups that have let me stay what people get out of it, and most people say it's relaxation. Although a surprising number of people do say they find it creative, but I think I'd argue that it's more of a skill rather than a creative process, because the people who do cross-stitch, they're very skilled. It's very like beautiful work that they make, and if you ever seen one and you've turned it over, they tend to be really neat at the back, and that's quite a big part of people cross-stitching, that there's this neatness and this skill to it. And I kind of think that's more what should be celebrated moving forward, and looking at cross-stitch in a new way. It's kind of its humble origins and where it's come from, and the skill. And although I sound a little bit scathing of it, I think you need to understand foundations of what you're messing with before you sort of can move on and do something new with it. So in more recent years, there's kind of been this resurgence or interest in craft and stuff like that, and there's this movement in cross-stitch called subversive cross-stitch, where people take sort of quite traditional patterns and drop swear words in it. This is quite a tame one. If you ever Google subversive cross-stitch, then there's some really good stuff on there, like gangster rap lyrics and bad words. And it's really funny, and I do like it, but again, it's still sort of more like a parody of traditional cross-stitch rather than really moving on and doing something new. So as I said, I've been giving workshops this year, and the reactions of the people that come to workshops are really interesting. Generally, I get the people that are interested in coming are cross-stitchers, and I'm finding it hard to reach out beyond cross-stitchers to maybe like artists or designers or other types of people. And I know there's other people out there doing it who aren't coming to the workshops, but as far as workshops go, it's cross-stitchers that come. And once we kind of start talking about this, you can do whatever you want, it kind of blows the minds a little bit. And one lady said to me, oh, it's so great that we can just be creative and do what we want. And I'll be like, you can do what you want anyway, just, you know, break the rules. But one lady was saying as well, she said, you've made cross-stitch cool. My grandson weren't interested in what I were doing before, but now he wants me to do Star Wars for his bedroom. So, so I'm glad I've done a little bit of good in the world. So for the other part of the project, as well as the DNA strands, I'm working on my own large-scale piece of work. And this is the pattern for mine, which is scaled down a bit. And it's on 24 pieces of graph paper. And again, it's inspired by 3 fates from Greek myth. But thinking about working on a piece of work that's appropriate to a cross-stitch medium, I've been sort of looking at mosaic, Byzantine domes, and the mosaic tiles work really nicely on a cross-stitch kind of gridded fabric because you've got this little square thing going on. And then this pattern sort of conforms to a Byzantine dome sort of layout. So it's got, I use kind of hearts in my work to represent death, but we'll skim that bit. And then this is the names of the 3 fates written in Greek, and then there's the little tools around the edge, and then there's the sort of DNA motif going around the edge of that as well. And then this is more like a sort of traditional Byzantine dome. So again, you've got like the Greek writing in the circle, which is taken from Bible, and there's sort of Jesus in the middle and associated images around outside. And then this is me about a month ago holding up my piece of work. I'm glad to say it's a bit further on than that, but I've only got until November to finish it. So there's a lot of sewing to do before then. But looking at this sort of dome idea as well, it worked quite well because the way they sort of crumble and you can see the plaster underneath, it means that if it's not finished in time, well, it won't be finished in time, and the exposed areas, then you'll kind of see this terracotta colouring through. And that were originally a piece of white fabric that I've covered in clay, and then I've washed the clay back off, and it's given it this nice sort of, like a fresco kind of look to it. And because it's about the 3 fates and life and death and time, it's kind of become quite a conceptual piece where I'm rushing against time to try and get it finished, kind of mimicking a rush through life to try and achieve something that's perfect, that's sort of inevitably impossible. So it won't be finished, and that's kind of part of the work. And you can actually see this one in the background, the little black one there with the long threads hanging down. That's an earlier piece that I did, and that's kind of led on to this one. So once, if I just go back a couple, once this is stitched, this row will be a sort of a long string of threads that hang down from the ceiling to the floor, and it'll be hung flat against the ceiling, so you kind of step inside this kind of tasseled area and then look up at this dome. And I think just in cross-stitch there's so much that's never been done before, and there's so much potential to explore. And even just this clay on the fabric, like I take this along to my workshops and they're just like, oh my God, you've put clay on fabric. It's not that exciting really. It's just like dyeing it and doing different things to it. But no one really seems to step out of the comfort zone with it. And I've been having sort of really interesting conversations through these workshops where I'm getting as much from the people who are coming as they're getting from me, and there's sort of an ideas exchange going on, and it's very much kind of what if we didn't use cotton and we used hair, or dog hairs come up as well. There's a guy who's like a fisherman, and he's going to use fishing wire to sew with instead of thread, and sew pieces on that he's found on the beach. So these pieces of DNA, there's like a massive potential at different things that you could possibly do to them. I'm just trying to think of some other examples. It's hard now, I'm stood in front of lots of people, but it tends to flow quite well in a workshop. kind of unpicking the edge of the fabric and using the edge of your piece of fabric to sew the DNA so that it disappears as the picture grows. A lot of people have kind of took this idea of genetics because it's DNA, but that's not particularly what I'm looking for. And they've kind of done some research that people are interested in sort of deformed strands of DNA and that side of things. But you know, I kind of think like you can't break the rules enough in an area that's not really been explored. And if someone wanted to do one and then burn it and send me ashes, that would be great. But yeah, so I'm looking for people to break the rules. I think it's kind of a bit like a colouring competition, but instead of staying inside lines nicely, I'm looking for people to destroy the lines and do something new. And I do think there's like a massive potential for what could be done with cross stitch. I've come up with so many more ideas while I'm doing this one. I don't quite know what I'm going to do next, to be honest. I could do with hiring a team of people to sew my ideas for me, but I can't afford it. But yeah, if anyone's interested in getting involved, there's information on that leaflet, and it'd be great to see some new ideas and pushing boundaries, especially from a group of people who don't necessarily have all these preconceptions of what cross-stitch could be. I'm not interested in the neatness or how well you can do little crosses. I don't care if you don't even sew it at all and you painted it on instead, but it's just using traditional materials in a new way. So yeah, that's what I've been up to. Thank you.